tonight and upon us as we listen. Might this time be yet another step for us to bring your kingdom here to earth. We ask all of this in your name. Amen.
I'm Helen Albanese. I am the person who has secured our guest speaker tonight. And I would like to first ask that everyone please put your phone on mute. I have in the last few minutes heard some chatter and conversations going on that are not relevant to this call. So as a courtesy to everyone, please put your system on mute. Lower left, the microphone. And I would like to introduce Erin. Erin Benbennick. I met Erin several years ago when I joined Hunter Mill Toastmasters. Erin is a lifelong resident of Northern Virginia who has followed the changes to our area with both joy and some mystification. Erin developed an interest in the fight to eliminate human trafficking as a result of attending workshops and seminars on this issue. She will discuss her own spiritual journey to step up and to volunteer with a program called Reset 180. Reset 180 is an organization focused on identification, rescue, and support of trafficking victims. Erin will talk for 25 minutes, then answer questions for 10 minutes at the end of her presentation. Please put all your questions in the chat box, and I will present them to Erin at the end of the program. This session will be recorded and will be available late this week on our church YouTube channel. Erin will also provide lists, handout cards, and other resources to our church office for your additional information. All of this soon will be on our new church website, which is under development also. I will post Erin's contact information in the chat box. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Erin Benbennick.
Thank you, Helen. As Helen mentioned, I first got interested in this topic as something other than background noise that we heard about when I went to a weekend workshop that was hosted by Mary Lou Swanberg out in Warrenton. It was 8 hours of absolutely compelling information about the different forms of human trafficking and what's being done about it, what can be done about it by the police, by investigative agencies, by social agencies, and by churches and individuals. And I thought, somebody ought to do something about that. And then I sat back and went on with my life. I attended a few more informational sessions, some workshops. Reset 180 used to be NOVA HTI, Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative, and they had a number of workshops and a lot of really good information, but mostly I said, interesting, somebody ought to do something about that. Then I went to their last big gala, which was in November 19. And at that point, I'd been in Toastmasters for a number of years. I'd done some growing up. I heard some stories I'd heard before, but I thought, I need to do something about that. So I've spent a lot of the time since then reading articles, getting better informed, finding out what's going on out there, but mostly still keeping it inside. And it wasn't until Helen sent me an email about a month ago and said, you know, I really got a lot out of that talk that you get at the Toastmasters meeting in 2018. Would you come and speak at my church? And I said, well, if that isn't the Holy Spirit grabbing me by the hair and saying, look, kid, I have this plan for you. Get off your duff and volunteer. So not only have I prepared this presentation, but I've also volunteered to be a speaker with Reset 180. And I am more than happy to give you all any information that you want, but I will also have links, as Helen said, at the end of the presentation. And I will share the presentation with Doris, who will make it available to you. So slavery still exists. And it's not just in third world countries, and it's not just in other countries, but it's here in the United States, and it is closer than you think. Now we call it human trafficking, but the change in name doesn't change the fundamental reality of it. It's an offense against human freedom and dignity and innocence. It's still the buying and selling of human beings as if they were simply objects in a store. And trafficking victims don't necessarily stay where they're collected. They can be transferred all over the country, all over the world. Just because somebody has been taken doesn't mean that they'll stay near home. My own family experienced what, in retrospect, was probably a human trafficking story. I have a distant cousin who just disappeared one day. She was 15 years old, lived in South Dakota. And her family and all the family around, and the police department and the FBI looked for her for years. 5 years after she disappeared, her body was found behind a convenience store near home. They never got the whole story. They don't know what happened. But clearly, she had been near home all those years, and they never got a chance to say goodbye to their daughter. And they never got a chance to find out, where have you been, what you've been doing, who can we go after, and there are no clues.
Please chip. That was a small piece.
I mentioned that I attended a conference in 2018. I'm going to share my screen now and actually give you some information here. That might work with me, maybe. One of the people at the conference was a mother of a girl who had been trafficked. I'm going to just read you. I hate it when people read to me on the screen, but this is something I think you need to hear out loud. I thought he was just my daughter's boyfriend. I had no idea who he really was until the police showed up at the door. I didn't want to believe them at first, but I knew something was different about her. She wasn't acting normal and was isolating herself more and more from her family. If I had just asked what was going on, maybe her innocence wouldn't have been taken from her. So tonight we're going to talk about what is trafficking, what are some signs you can be watching for, who's involved in it, where is it happening, and what can we do about it. The definition of human trafficking is recruiting, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services. And what makes it trafficking is the use of force or fraud or coercion, and the result is involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. There are two major categories. One is labor trafficking, where the most common picture you might have is of migrant workers, but there are a lot of places that labor is trafficked. It might be in local restaurants, in hotels, in hospitals, any place that they need people who don't necessarily have good education, but have a need for a job and don't have any way out. And then sex trafficking. Sex trafficking occurs when you've got a commercial sex act. Somebody's paying for sex, and it's induced by force, fraud, or coercion. And if the person who is providing the service is under 18 years old, they are not considered a child prostitute, because that concept does not exist. They are, by definition, being trafficked. A child cannot make that kind of a decision. So how bad is it? It's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world, and it's growing, and it's expected to take over the drug trade. It's a $150 billion industry. That's a lot of money. And it's more than Intel, Microsoft, Nike, and Starbucks make in a year combined. One of my resources was the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and since they started in 2007, they've tracked over almost 250,000 calls. Department of Justice says 50% of the people trafficked are under 18 years old. So those are the kids in your neighborhood, potentially your friends' children or your own children. As of 2019, the average age for sex trafficking is 13 years old. Think back to your basic arithmetic. What does it take to calculate an average? You add up all the numbers and then divide by how many of them there are. That means there are people well under 13 years old who are being trafficked. 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And then there are outliers where even toddlers are trafficked. Just absolutely horrific. Now, some general myths. People have these ideas about trafficking, that it's a violent, or usually a violent crime, but the traffickers sometimes use psychology to ingratiate their victim, make them more dependent on them, make them believe that the trafficker is that person's only friend, or threatening them, particularly if they've been able to take away their passport if they're here illegally. Human trafficking doesn't all involve commercial sex. As we talked about, there is labor. In fact, while the numbers seem to skew towards sex trafficking in the United States, we happen to be the world's greatest customer, the largest customer for sex trafficking. The rest of the world, it's mostly labor trafficking. And another concept is that traffickers target victims they don't know. Oh no. They get to know their victims really well, so they are able to manipulate them. Sometimes the traffickers are family members of the victim. In fact, there are times when it's the familial trafficking may go back generations. It's just the way that family happens to make money. So there are 5 signs of trafficking that are kind of the big ones that help you kind of get your mind thinking in terms of what I'm seeing possibly trafficking. And I use she here, but boys are trafficked too. Roughly 7% of those trafficked are male. What kind of companions does this person have? Are they usually with somebody who's older? Do they only hang out with people who are older than they are? How do they look? Do they show signs of physical or mental abuse? Do you see bruises? Do you see the general unhealthy look? Do they seem kind of disoriented or withdrawn? Frequently, they'll just pull back and be very shy. What kind of belongings does this person have? If this is somebody you see repeatedly, do they always seem to have exactly the same clothing on, for example? Or do they not appear to have a home to go to? What kind of bling do they have? Sometimes their trafficker will give them goodies, like an expensive watch or an expensive phone. But they might not have anything else that really maps to their having anything that expensive. And what kind of security is being maintained around them? Are there surveillance cameras and locks on the doors and a locked fence around the place that they're living or the place that they're working? I'd like you to keep these questions, these general concepts in mind, and I'm going to show you a brief video that was put out by the Michigan State Police a number of years ago. In the first half of it, you'll see what look like just normal things going on while some service workers are helping in a neighborhood. And then they'll play it back and they will highlight the clues about trafficking going on.
When you work in the service industry, you see a lot of homes in all sorts of areas. You meet a lot of people and even pets. Out here, you have to take your job seriously and always be on the lookout to find better ways to safeguard the people you serve.
What kind of shop you guys know going here?
Tool and die shop.
Great. Welcome to the neighborhood.
Thanks.
Or the products that protect their homes, or services to get their homes running just right. You work hard every day because you don't want to miss a thing.
Like you just did.
Do I have your attention?
Workers who are in people's homes on a day-to-day basis are a critical part of identifying potential cases of human trafficking and combating this horrific crime. When you know what to look for, you can help bring an end to human trafficking.
As service workers, you play an important role in the detection of human trafficking. You are on the front lines, in homes and in neighborhoods. Now that you know some of the signs to look for, you can help save those who are being victimized. Together, we can make a difference. If you identify someone you think may need help, please contact the National Human Trafficking Resource Center at 888-373-7888. This is a toll-free hotline that's available to answer calls from anywhere in the country, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all calls are confidential. On behalf of the Michigan State Police, thank you for your help in keeping our communities safe.
The presentation that I'm going to share with Doris has got links to all of these things. So if you want to go back and look at them again, you can see them. But I'm not going to ask for a show of hands or anything, but how many of you caught the signs? They look like just kind of everyday things, but there's everyday stuff you just have to be aware of. So who are the traffickers? Well, they come from all over. There is no pattern to what a trafficker looks like. They come from every race, gender, socioeconomic group. Sometimes it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend, as in the example that I gave you at the beginning. Sometimes it's a gang. They'll bring in kids, letting them believe that the gang is a safe haven for them, and they find out that it's anything but. Sometimes it's in the employers, for example, in the illicit massage businesses, where they may hire somebody in thinking that she's going to be a masseuse, and she finds out she's doing a lot more than massaging. And again, some families have made sex trafficking their business. Something we don't think about is who are the customers. Once upon a time, we called them Johns, but they're customers. They're buying a commodity. I looked at the demand abolition research report on who buys sex, and primarily you see that, at least of the people who responded to the survey, most of them are white heterosexual men who are either currently married or have never been married. Widows and divorcees, somehow they're very low numbers. And when they're buying, they think that it's just guys being guys. They think that prostitution is a victimless crime. They make the assumption that the provider is doing this job because they enjoy it. And they also have a tolerance towards infidelity, because clearly a married man who goes out and buys sex is not real big on infidelity towards his own wife. They're likely to have had an affair. They're likely to review porn on a regular basis, likely to have sexually transmitted disease, and they all lack impulse control. They do something because it feels good and because they want it. Victims, like the traffickers, could come from anywhere. They can be any age, any ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. They can be people who've never had any education at all the way up through kids in college. A lot of times you find that the traffickers are targeting people with pre-existing disabilities or emotional issues. Perhaps they were abused at home. They're trying to escape a miserable life at home, and they escape into a life that's even more miserable. The average age for people to be recruited is 11 to 13 for boys and 12 to 14 for girls. Think of the kids that age that you know, and they're targeted. And once they've been brought into the life, their average life expectancy is 7 years. So how does it happen? How does the trafficker do the job? They'll target the victim. Traffickers have a tremendous understanding of psychology. Whether they've been educated in it or not, they seem to be able to pick out the victims. They can see what their vulnerabilities are. They can see what things will help them to gain that person's trust. They see how to gather information from them and identify whatever vulnerabilities will make them willing to come along with the program. Then they recruit them. They'll isolate the victim. As you recall from the mother's story at the beginning, she was being isolated from her family. She was also being isolated from all her friends. The boyfriend was making himself the only person that she was hanging out with until he took her to where his gang was, and they gang raped her. The trafficker develops a dependency, develops a friendship, but they exploit the vulnerabilities, whether it's something you normally would think of as silly. Girls, for instance, liking to get maybe jewelry or a nice handbag or clothes or go out somewhere special, but then they trap them and tell the victim, well, I expect you to reimburse me for all these gifts that I've given you and all the favors that I've done for you. They'll abuse the victim if they're refused. And ultimately, they may threaten the family for retribution, as in the first instance where the girl was told they would take her 3-year-old sister and traffic her, and they'd beat up her brother. They made it real obvious that they were not playing around. So where's it happening? All over the world, wherever the money is. This is a business. It's all about making money. This is a heat map for the United States put together by the Polaris Project. You'll notice that there's a lot of red along the coasts. You can tell where the big cities are just looking at this. You'll notice also on the East Coast, here we have all the way down the Route 95 corridor. That's called the circuit. Traffickers will load up a van or a truck with girls and go from rest stop to rest stop to rest stop and make them available. Throwing out the ones they don't need anymore, maybe picking up some new ones, but up and down 95 all the time. In Virginia, this is information from the Polaris Project on calls that they have received. Clearly, they can't extrapolate out, well, we know that there have been exactly this many people who've been trafficked, but they can base it somewhat on the calls that they have received, and they know the calls are just a small number compared to what the total most likely is. Since 2007, they've had almost 6,000 contacts. Now, this is just through the end of 2019, so I would imagine it's up over 6,000 at this point. So many people at risk. But the important thing to understand is somebody has to make the call. Somebody has to let them know something's going on. The Polaris Project provides the National Human Trafficking Hotline as a service to law enforcement agencies so that they can go in and look at what kind of calls are we getting. They can get more detail, obviously, than we have here so that they can build a case and go out and do something. So they can make some strategic plans for how can we address this going forward. And here's the part that hurts for those of us who are from Oakton, Vienna, Tysons, McLean. This map is an output from a study done by the group that's now Reset 180, where they investigated illicit massage businesses. These are ones that were identified by the police department. They know what's going on in there, but they don't have the legal standing to go in unless they've got witnesses to tell them what's going on. They can't do anything about it. But there are 85 of them in Fairfax County. They estimate that almost 600 customers a day, which amounts to over 200,000 customers a year and $23.6 million a year. I put a circle around the area closest to us. This area right here is Tysons Corner. Most of their activity is between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon during the week, right after lunch. So you can have a nice business lunch and then go to the massage parlor for dessert. This is going on right near us. And then we have the internet. Activity on the internet has just exploded since COVID. Not only do they have websites where you can place an order, just like on Amazon, pick up the age, the size, the height, the nationality, whatever you want. Order your victim and arrange to have them come to your home or meet them somewhere else. It's also a resource for them to target potential victims because kids are stupid. Kids say way too much about themselves online. They give away everything. They have no secrets. And the traffickers can pick all this up and identify somebody and make initial contacts and start to do the grooming that brings them in. So why does trafficking happen? As horrible as it is. Well, there's consumer demand. There are people out there who want this stuff. And where there's a demand, someone will come in and be a supplier. We don't have entirely trustworthy individuals at all levels in our government. So there are a lot of places where they just let it go, whether it's because they're putting money themselves in their own pockets or they feel like they have other things that are more important. And finally, it happens because those of us who find out about it don't speak out. We're all guilty of it because we let it happen. John Whitehead wrote an article called The Essence of Evil, Sex with Children Has Become Big Business in America. And he basically said every individual who doesn't raise the alarm is guilty of helping sex trafficking continue. So what can we do? I tried to bring it down to 3 simple words: learn, pray, and act. Learn more about it. And as you're learning, share what you've learned. Be sure to share it with your children. Let them know these kinds of things can happen. If you're in an uncomfortable position, please come to me and we'll talk about it. If you see somebody, one of your friends perhaps, who has unusual things going on, maybe they've changed a lot, come to me, we'll get help for them. Include the victims and the traffickers in your prayers. The victims need prayers for consolation, for strength. The traffickers need prayers for conversion. You can set up or join prayer teams. Once again, Reset 180 actually has a bi-weekly prayer team. If anybody's interested in joining that, you can go to their website and sign right up. And we've got to stop feeding the monsters that feed all of this, all the kinds of things that make people victims, potential victims, the homelessness, poverty, self-esteem issues, and something called the pornification of America, where there's so much filth out there. It's available to our children. It's available to anybody who wants to see it. We also need to call on our elected officials and tell them this is important. You need to focus on it. They need to fix it. We need to prioritize putting traffickers and the customers in jail. We need to help the police find ways to address the situation. Sometimes they just need the training to understand what's going on and what steps can be taken. And we need our social services to provide better protection to runaways in particular, because they are prime targets for trafficking. They have nowhere to go, they have no friends, and a trafficker will come, bring them in, take care of them, and then put them to work. With respect to the pornification of America, Holly Martin Smith wrote a book called Walking Prey. Holly is a survivor. She was trafficked, she has been rescued, and has gone on to live her life. And she said the process of breaking her down began before she ever met the trafficker. She was a slave more to popular culture. As you see, advertisers, entertainment producers, and other moguls of the media were the ones who seasoned me. They were the ones who were grooming her to accept sexual exploitation and prostitution. My body was an object. Its sole purpose, I believed, was for sex. This is the kind of thing that breaks my heart when I think in terms of the whole women's liberation movement, where the thing that we complained about the most was that men were using us as sex objects, and now women have been liberated and all this stuff is opened up and we're making objects of ourselves. We need to teach our children that that's just not right. Now, I gave 2 sets of cards to Doris. One of them is the indicator card from the Department of Health and Human Services ICE campaign, and it's just credit card size. And on one side it has definitions of human trafficking versus smuggling, and on the back it has a list of trafficking indicators. These are more indicators of labor trafficking, but it's safe to say that some of it bleeds over. It has to do also with sex trafficking. Now, you might be a little reluctant to do anything. But let me tell you about one of the callers' story. Carolina called into the National Trafficking Hotline, and she had seen something that just didn't look right. She saw a licensed contractor recruiting children in Central America and bringing them to this country to work. And they were supposed to be able to send money home to their families, but they weren't actually being paid, and they were working long hours, and they were forced to do work even in the traffickers' homes. So she was concerned about possibly they were being physically abused. She was worried, though, about reporting. She wanted to stay anonymous. They will keep your name anonymous. They will not share that information. But what happened was they were able to report her tip to local contacts, and they worked with the local child welfare agency to investigate and got the kids out of the situation. So call. It's more important to call with a suspicion and have them find out, well, no, nothing screwy was going on, but we investigated it and it's okay, than to not call and potentially have these children trapped. A second card that I gave to Doris is the key tag card. It breaks up into pieces, as you can see where there's some perforations along here, so it's easy to hang on to, but it's also got this little tag here where if you see a trafficking victim, you can break it off and give it to them because it has information on who they can call for help. Right here is the National Trafficking Hotline special number for people who are afraid. If you have a suspicion, there's also the tip line that's here and here. So here's a victim's story. She was trafficked for 3 years when she was 14 years old. All the time she had both parents in her life, and she was seeing a counselor, and even ended up on probation for running away, but no one ever helped her. No one ever asked her what was going on. And if somebody had cared enough to just ask what was going on, she might never have been a victim. So ask the question. And I want to end on a success story. Teenager was trafficked and connected through to Reset 180 through federal law enforcement as a result of tips to the trafficking hotline. She'd been abused as a child, and that was what sort of opened the door, so she was comfortable with the idea of, or if not comfortable, at least she understood what it was like to be abused. And her boss began pursuing her. She managed to break away though, and now she's got a baby and a family. And they've helped her with a delivery mentor to have the baby and got items for them, and they've provided her with housing and therapy and taught her how to budget and help her with babysitting. Good things can happen, but they only happen if somebody stands up and says something to try to help them. I think you'll recognize this quote: do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Because people need your help. You can help them. Thank you.
Erin, thank you for an awesome, frightening presentation. I had heard maybe one or two of those statistics and maybe a little bit of information, and knew that people were recruited, but this, when you say, oh, it's happening in Tysons Corner at 1 o'clock in the massage parlor, like, huh? Just eye-opening. Thank you so much. We have a few questions which I would like to bring forward. First, is there a list of the massage parlors publicly available? Do you
I'm
know?
not sure. I can make the report available to you. I think I have a link for it, and if not, I can send the report itself to anybody who wants, who lets me know they want it. I don't want to overburden Doris because she has one or two other things to do in the course of the day.
Yes, we noticed. And she says thank you.
Yeah, it talks about locations. I suspect there is a list out there. Certainly the police department knows what it is, but they didn't release that level of detail in the report itself.
Okay.
Now, just as a hint, one of the things that you can look for, illicit massage businesses are typically storefront businesses. A lot of times they'll have a big neon sign, massage, that sort of thing. Now, the neon sign doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going on in there. My cousin is a masseuse in Colorado, and she's got a neon sign, and I'm quite sure she's not doing any of this stuff. But if you notice that You know, most storefront places, you can see right through the front window. Well, think of the hairdressers and stuff like that. You can see what's going on. They'll black out the window. You'll see locks on the door, probably a security camera, so that they only let you in with, they'll buzz you in. So it's not just, you can't just walk in there anytime that you want. Sometimes, you're not going to see this at Tysons, but some places will be surrounded by a wall and barbed wire. But enough things to make it clear that this is, we're not going to the donut shop by any means. It's something, somebody's trying to hide something. So those are the things that you can kind of watch for, and you might, well, know exactly where some are and not realize that's what it is.
Thank you, Erin.
Mhm.
Our next question is probably more of a comment. Why don't we hear more about this?
Because it's an ugly topic that mainstream media doesn't want to talk about. Think, for example, of all the stuff that we've heard about Mr. Weinstein. Very briefly, we heard about that. How about Jeffrey Epstein? Well, we heard about it. It was, what, a 9-day wonder, and now it's all disappeared. It's ugly. And people don't want to think about it. They just don't. And my personal opinion, our news media is no longer journalism, it's entertainment. And they only put on what they think will entertain. This is not entertaining. There are, however, some excellent movies and videos out that you can find on the web. And I've listed some of them in this long page after page of references. One of them I actually watched again last night. There are 2 movies available on Amazon Prime if you have access to that. And my brain has just gone dead and I can't think of the name of them. But if you just search on trafficking on Amazon, they'll pop up.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is also a comment. I'm afraid that most people are so terrified of ICE and DHS that they would never call that number for fear that they could personally be the ones that get into trouble.
That is part of the problem. That's why we don't hear as many statistics. The numbers are not as high as they could be because they're so afraid of what else might happen that they feel like, well, that will be worse than what I'm living through right now. It's horrible, and all we can do is try to help them along. You know, if we see somebody, be their friend, and pray. Pray, pray.
See something, say something.
See something, say something.
Here's our next comment. I have heard that the teenagers, almost always African American, who are dropped off in neighborhoods to go door to door soliciting magazine sales, may be there against their will. Are there any reports of this activity as part of trafficking?
I've heard that too. I don't have enough information on it, but you know, there is somebody else on the call who might have some insight into that. Mary Lou Swanberg, do you have any more information on that? Helps me be able to call out my my expert team in the background.
You may need to unmute.
Hi, Erin. I forgot what the question was because I was writing something in chat.
The question was about, my brain just went dead. I hate this.
African-American teenagers who go door to door soliciting magazines may be part of the
Magazine
trafficking.
candy sales and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think anybody can, I mean, there are always so many scams, it could be anything.
Yeah.
But I know that women of color in particular are highlighted for this trade.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I had another comment about concerning the DHS and the ICE. You can just call the hotline. You don't have to go to DHS or ICE, just call the hotline.
Yeah.
Great presentation, Erin.
Oh, thank you.
Our next question is this mainly a massage business?
And I'm assuming we're talking about IMBs. Well,
Well, where the I guess the girls and the boys would be taken to be used for sex trafficking? Is it mainly massage parlors where they would be taken?
No, they could be anywhere. They could just be kept in somebody's basement. There was one story, there's so many stories, and 25 minutes I obviously went over already. There's a story about a group of 3 people who had been maintaining a stable of children for sexual activity in their home, kept them in the basement, had separate rooms where the customer could decide what age range did they want to play with. And they even had a room that was for toddlers, where they could go in and abuse the children. So not a massage parlor. And massage parlors, based on the study, most massage parlors are staffed by Asian women. The majority of them are. So it's all the other stuff, the gang-led trafficking and the pimp trafficking and the parental trafficking, where they just use the kids and they set up a room or they send them off with whoever the customer is, not really ever knowing, is that child ever going to come back? Well, I don't care, I got my money.
Our next question, do you find that trafficking in older is it trafficking in older generations or typically with youth? Is it the older generations that are buying and they're buying the youth, or are
It's
older people trafficked as well?
the range that I saw in the IMBs and in some of the other materials that I read was usually as early as late teens, early 20s, on up till mid 40s was where the bulk of it was. And when you think about it, that's when people are healthiest and libido is the strongest and that sort of thing. So it just logically makes sense.
Someone made a comment that restaurants are big offenders.
Now, you never know how many unpaid staff there are back in the kitchen or waiting on your table.
We have 2 other comments. The internet is a main place where this trade goes on, and porn is the gateway drug. I like that, gateway drug for trafficking. It is usually the first time a person buys sex. It's an easy slide to go from looking to touching.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you
There are a
comment?
number of really interesting studies on the effect of porn on our culture and on the way people think. Another thing about porn is over the years it has become increasingly more violent. So the customers see this violent porn and then buy somebody to act that out with. And that is anywhere from beating somebody up to what they used to call snuff films, where they kill them. I read some studies done in Amsterdam a couple of years back where in Amsterdam, prostitution is legal.
They're also moving the red light district out of where it used to be. I saw that the other day.
But one of the brothel owners said, well, yeah, we lose a couple of girls every month. They get killed. We just replace them. No big deal. You know, just the callousness of these people, because as far as they're concerned, they're commodities. It's just something you pull off a shelf. And if you need another one, you go out and get another one. No big deal.
We have another comment that people, and you had mentioned this, people with disabilities are often targets, and huge sports events such as Super Bowl, and I've read that Olympics, particularly and that go on for long periods of time. And I would assume any World Cup or similar type sports events is where all the clients are trucked in for service opportunities.
Well, they can use the parking lot if they've got vans. They can use nearby hotels, or people have a Super Bowl party at home and bring in somebody to be the entertainment during halftime if they're not interested in watching the show. It's just horrifying.
I think that sort of brings us to the end of our Q&A time. Erin, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for your time and your very informed presentation you've made that was so easy to follow. I'm going to put your name and email here in the chat. And of course, it will be available from Doris at the office, but take out your phone and make a picture of it if you can't don't have time to write it down. And again, thank you, Erin. And now I'm going to switch it back to Angie for our next piece in the program. Erin, do you want to stop recording now?
Yeah.